This is the Baunfire Gaming Podcast, episode 339. I am your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week we'll be talking about Xbox's handheld is on hold, EA shutters Black Panther, my The Division 2 DLC review, and much more. We have gone through another week of multiple examples of how the industry, for better or worse, is changing. It is it's self-correcting. It seems like I don't want to be callous. I'm definitely not defending any of the big publishers and corporations and stuff who are doing all of these really brutal layoffs and things like that. But I do think it's worth talking about how it seems like things are just coming back to normal, and normal isn't good when it involves a bunch of people losing their jobs, games being canceled, studios being shut down. We're going to talk about this with EA and the Black Panther game they were working on in the studio that subsequently is being shut down along with the game. We'll get further into that, but it just the more it happens, the less surprised I am, and I don't like that. I don't like that it's almost feeling normalized or like it's a thing that we just need to accept. I don't feel that way. I feel like there should be pushback. There should be criticism as these companies are laying people off. They're also, their CEOs are getting these huge bonuses and stock buybacks and all this crap. But then there's the other part of it, which I talked about, in the last couple of weeks, where, EA, which is the company we'll talk about today, is doing all these layoffs. And they've done, hundreds, if not thousands of layoffs over the last couple of years. But they have more people this year than they did last year. Like they've actually grown. And I don't think a company hiring more than it's firing necessarily negates the negativity or the bad practices or whatever, whatever you want to talk about or consider it. But it does add more context to the story. I think it adds context that we don't really talk about or consider. The dirtiest part about that is that industry wide, it seems like there's a lot of people getting fired or laid off, and then they're just being replaced by cheaper people. And I understand, like, that's kind of how business and corporations work. It's an ugly part of just corporate life in general, and I think it's especially gross in the games industry because maybe even more so than the music industry or movies or TV. With gaming, I feel like the ladder from your frontline game developer, the creative, right? The person who, makes the texture art or models the characters or makes the plant that goes on the shelf in the room, or the sound designer or the writer for the narrative part of the game. Like all of those people, the creatives, the people who aren't interested in bottom lines and corporate crap, I feel like that ladder seems like it's the shortest in the entire like creative industry, from those frontline devs to like the CEO in gaming. It seems like gaming has the shortest stretch from developer to senior dev to producer to head of the team or head of the studio, and then up to the suits, right? And I feel like that makes this seem especially gross. And I could be wrong. If you're involved in one of these other music, TV, movies, whatever, maybe you can tell me I'm wrong. But it really does seem like that relationship between suit and creative is so direct in gaming that it makes this stuff feel worse. It feels like there's more, dabbling. Like in movies, the impression I'm under is that often in movies and TV, a movie is made essentially by a corporation, by a company that springs up to make the movie and then disappears, and all the people know that they're there for that project and then they're gone. And it's every movie that gets made is basically its own little company that pops up. It gets populated with all these workers. Essentially everyone in that industry is a contractor, and they come in, they do the thing, and then they all disband. And they work together on other projects, and maybe certain directors or whoever have favorites to bring on every time. But with gaming, we're supposed to have these established studios that keep long-term veteran developers, and blah blah blah. And we're used to that. We're used to seeing developers who, guy, we look at people like Todd Howard and stuff who are at their studios, or under the same company, working on these same franchises for multiple decades, for 20, 30 plus years. And it just seems like that's not compatible with the corporate world, right? And it seems like it's always kind of been like this. And I think I've talked about this before, where these layoffs and stuff, this has always been a thing. I just think that as we're more connected through social media, as things are more transparent and more publicized, and as games media focuses more on this stuff, the old days of starting a game production round, firing up production, hiring a bunch of people, especially a bunch of contractors. You make the game over 2 or 3 years, and then everyone gets fired. That's how it's kind of always been. But I feel like it used to feel kind of like the movie industry, where that was expected, and now it doesn't feel like that. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think it's because mostly games don't take 1 or 2 years to make anymore. Where back in the day, you could get brought into a project, work a couple years, get that game out, put it on your credits, and move to a new game, new studio, new project, whatever. Well, now games take 4 or 5 plus years, and that ends up being these huge chunks of people's careers, and then those games get shut down. And I think that's like one of the toughest things about all this stuff. And with the industry shrinking in general, it seems like, or consolidating, maybe is the better word, which we've been seeing for years, is that I talked about it in my Discord, where there's a few game devs in there, and how rough it is, that it seems like we have, there's probably so many devs out there who have been in game development for 5, 10 years without a single shipped game. And that's horrible, right? Like, think about, like, even for me, in the current job I'm at, I've been here almost 13 years. There's definitely a pathway where there's game developers who started their careers the same time I did my current job, who maybe have been lucky to ship 1 or 2 games. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of people who have shipped more, but it's just, I don't know. It sucks, and it's so hard to talk about, because I want to talk like realistically about it, and calmly, and without being too sensationalized and hyped up. And we see it. It's kind of frustrating when I see fairly well renowned and well known games journalists and stuff, like, taking the like easiest, kind of laziest takes on this stuff, of just like, "Ugh, bleh." It's just always just the same, like, copy paste outrage that they posted last time, instead of like getting into it and like figuring out what's going on and talking to people and getting like actual insight. It's just kind of outrage, and I would argue bait, almost, to a point. But that's maybe too tough. But I don't know. I don't know when it gets better. I don't know if it really ever does. I think we see what's going on with EA is probably a great example. Even a giant publisher like them, kind of narrowing down the franchises they're working on, which unfortunately means they're probably going to be less experimental and less interested in doing unique things. And then we'll have to hope that indies and other types of spin up studios and stuff can be the ones who really are innovating, while these big kind of legacy publishers and studios kind of turn into these kind of legacy machines. Which, like, Ubisoft is another one that's done that. So I don't know. We'll have to wait and see, but I will remain eternally optimistic. Okay, let's jump into the gaming news. The Xbox handheld has reportedly been put on hold. This was blown up by a bunch of people. I can't even tell at this point who the original reporting was. Jez Corden, Insider Gaming, and a bunch of other people have put this out. It's not been confirmed by Xbox. They don't really need to confirm anything, actually, at least in my opinion. Phil Spencer has talked about a handheld, but they've never given any dates. That's all been speculation and rumor, and so on. Even then, the speculation on this handheld wasn't until after the next Xbox to replace the Series S and X, which is probably still 2 or 3 years away. And so it's very likely this handheld, anyways, wasn't expected for 3 or 4 years, right? And so it's been interesting. So some more of the reporting that's come out about this is that Xbox is doing this, putting this project on hold because they recognize that the Windows platform right now, which would be used as the operating system, just isn't very good for handhelds at the moment. There is some speculation that Steam recently opening up their Steam OS, which is on the Steam Deck, to all handheld platforms, and it being extremely good and outshining the current Windows operating system on these handhelds, may have factored into this. I would be surprised if that's the case. I suspect this has probably been something they've been considering for a while. Um, this seems like a good idea. Like it's so interesting to me that so much, and obviously, the a lot of the games media and influencers and stuff maybe kind of enjoy, ripping on Xbox whenever they get a chance to. Um, it really seems like this is being portrayed as like this like big failure or something like that. And instead of that, I think it's a smart move. Now that's obviously because I'm a little biased myself and things like that. So, this all falls in the middle. But if, one of the most consistent negatives and concerns I've seen from people about an Xbox handheld has been, the hardware can be as good as they can make it, but if it's still this clunky version of Windows on there, then it's not going to win people over, especially when there's competitors like Steam OS, which now can, in theory, be on other hardware. And so that could end up being a huge competitor for Xbox trying to get into the handheld market. Not to mention the existing Switch 2 hardware, which is going to be around for, it's coming out in a few days. Before I record again, it'll be out. And that's probably going to be around for the next 6 to 8 years at least. And it will get a huge, part of the market, even if it's inferior technology. And we also have heard these rumors of PlayStation wanting to dive back into this opportunity to do a handheld. So if they do it, they need to do it right. And it seems prudent that if they don't think they can do it right, then they shouldn't do it yet. And it's just, I go into this all the time, and I know I'm an Xbox fanboy in a big part, but it's still hard for me to see this stuff. And, we're in this situation where, like PlayStation has had like a really weak generation in a lot of ways. Basically, the best thing about PlayStation has been that they've sold a crap ton of units, all things considered, especially because their lineup has been pretty weak. It's been held up a lot by third party studios and games, kind of boosting it up with, temporary exclusive deals and things like that. But, its actual first party output's been pretty weak, which in the history of the platforms has always been one of their big strengths. The PlayStation 3 and 4 both had insane lineups when it came to games. And PlayStation 5 has had basically a bunch of sequels to PlayStation 4 games. Many of them probably could have been PlayStation 4 like cross-gen games. And then like Astrobot, which has been interesting. Their bottom line isn't suffering from it, so I'm sure they don't care too much. But the reaction to this is so frustrating because it's like this is a smart move. Like this is a good thing. We didn't have a date on this. We had no idea when it was really coming out, if it was ever even going to actually make it out. It seems like it was in early production or planning, anyways. It's just frustrating that instead of this being seen as like a prudent, smart move to correct the one of the biggest concerns about this, it's being portrayed as some big like failure by Xbox. There has also been some side reporting related to this about the next Xbox, kind of home console to replace the Series X and S is still fully go. My assumption is that handheld was probably in very early planning stages, where I believe it was months ago at this point, we were under the impression that the next Xbox hardware has been like finalized. So it's very likely they're getting into like the nitty gritty of that new console. Now, that doesn't mean it's coming out like this year. I definitely don't think it's coming out in 2025. There's been rumors about 26. I would say 27 is maybe even more likely for a new Xbox console, despite the fact that everyone seems to think that it's not actually going to happen. Maybe it won't, but I think it will. I think that that's kind of their focus right now from a hardware perspective, and I suspect, that they're kind of in the middle of seeing where this new strategy is taking them with focusing on Game Pass and being a lot more open to multi-platform situations and deals. What I think people forget about all of this stuff, whether it's the multi-platform strategy that Xbox is playing with, or whether it's Game Pass on its own, at any time, if they decide, or if Microsoft or Xbox or whoever says, this isn't working, we can't keep putting our games on other platforms, we can't keep doing Game Pass, then they'll just end it. Like, it can change at any moment. I think that there's kind of this like assumption that nothing can ever change. They have to stick with this strategy forever because some of the other platforms are so stubborn to stick to their very old school strategies. I think we're seeing a more dynamic publisher here, a more dynamic platform where that may not happen. Now, personally, if they turn tail like tomorrow and stopped Game Pass or stopped their multi-platform push, I think it would probably hurt them because I think that they really need to show that they're actually dedicated to this to see how it actually plays out. I think we'll see them kind of finessing their multi-platform strategy as time goes on. I personally, as kind of a fanboy myself, don't love the day one multi-platform deals, like with Doom and stuff like that. I really do think they need to keep that 3 to 6 to 12 month exclusivity period, to give some value to the people who do have your own hardware or are on your own kind of platforms. And then the Game Pass thing, basically just pay attention to the quality of games going on to that. That will determine, one, what studios are willing to do it, and two, how much money Xbox is putting into the deals. And like I said, I don't think we'll ever see Game Pass go away entirely. But if it isn't worth it, we'll just see the quality of games on it probably drop. We'll probably see more of the situations like what we have even now, where only Ultimate gets all the first party games day one, and then they come to standard later on. That's where it's kind of exclusivity within their own platform. Obviously, that's only with Game Pass though. So I don't think this handheld story is honestly that big of a deal. I think it's probably smart by them to not feel like they have to go through with this plan just because it's been rumored already. And I have to imagine their focus is on this next console. I think as much as people think that they've checked out of that market, I don't think they have. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised. I have a feeling their next console is probably gonna be more successful than the Xbox Series S and X, simply because they're probably going to take the pressure off themselves to try to directly compete with PS5 on like like for like basis. I think there's a really good chance their next console comes out. It's probably going to be a little bit more expensive than the PlayStation, and it's probably going to be really good. And I think once they stop emphasizing or even attempting to compete with PlayStation directly, or even Nintendo at that, we may see them do things that ends up making them more successful and more competitive. I think one of the crucial things is that the next Xbox and the next PlayStation, the PlayStation 6, which will probably come out, my guess is shortly after the next Xbox, that they aren't just copies of each other again. This current generation with the PS5 and the Xbox Series X essentially being the same consoles with some really minor differences that essentially come down to gimmicks, has really been boring, honestly. And while there's been a few games where there's been significant differences between them, for the most part there haven't been. And I hope that changes. And I hope at the end of the day, I hope everyone's more competitive. I hope in the next gen or the next 5-10 years, PlayStation stops this stupid live service push and actually starts making games again. I hope that Xbox, kind of figures out their strategy and gets a little bit more predictable so people stop whining all the time. And I hope that Nintendo, I don't know, joins the current decade and makes hardware one day that isn't two generations behind, even though they'll still sell 100 million units. Moving on to the next story, the Division 2 Battle for Brooklyn DLC is out, and I have completed it. I've done the whole story. I haven't gone through every single little side thing and found all the hunters and all that, but I really enjoyed it. I thought the story of this new DLC was it was neat. It was cool. There's some nice little surprises and things like that. The whole rumor that this story doesn't really push the grand story along too much seems to have come to fruition. It seems like it does add a little bit. I can kind of see where they're going with it, but this doesn't, like, for spoilers, I guess, doesn't like conclude the switch over of Keener or even Theo Parnell in a big part. It's just kind of a side story, and I think there's going to be a lot of people, and probably me included, who are kind of unsatisfied with the fact that, like, this DLC is multiple years in the making, was delayed significantly, like a whole year, last year, and it just feels like knowing the reality of the development situation of the Division 2 at this point. It's a miracle this even came out, but uh, being less knowledgeable on it, kind of taking a step back, it's kind of a bummer, like, I really hope that this was going to be the bridge between Division 2 and 3, and it definitely isn't. I can't, at least I can't imagine it is. It seems like this really was just basically like a side story, which is fine, and it was a great experience. I enjoyed it. And the world is cool that you get to explore it. It's just thick with nostalgia if you're a Division 1 player. I just with so much of the post-launch content for Division 2, I've really wondered if, the old saying of, is the juice worth the squeeze? And I've talked about this a lot with Division 2, and I certainly hope that none of this post-launch development has delayed Division 3, because if it has, it hasn't been worth it. Now, maybe financially, obviously they know their numbers and all of that. Maybe it has been to them, and fair enough, right? But to me, my biggest issue is they have convoluted the story of the division so badly during the post launch of Division 2, where Division 1 was pretty grounded, lots of mysteries to figure out that were left unfigured out at the end of the game in a good way, but had a pretty good arc for itself. It ends very satisfyingly. The post launch content for Division 1 was pretty minimal, but it was definitely, like, I think it added to it, right? And then Division 2 came out, I thought had a great base story. And then the kind of end game content that you played, I think, introduced some new stuff and kind of added to the whole experience. And then Warlords of New York came out. And I love Warlords of New York. It's great. But it's definitely a story that actually seems like it was supposed to take place in Division 1 or between 1 and 2, and definitely not at the end of 2, because it just seems like you're stepping back in time, and that's my speculation, is that's what it was supposed to be. And then so much of the post launch content since then has been, in my opinion, kind of rough. Whether it's been entire stories that kind of didn't impact anything, or if it's been introducing some really, really not very grounded concepts and stuff of multiple characters being brought back from the dead, or old story content obviously being retconned and kind of whisked away and kind of hand waved. And they're in a tough spot, and I think that every time they add more story to this game, it sort of feels like they make it harder for the Division 3 to, like, bring it back together and then move the story on. So we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll have to wait and see about it. But overall, I thought this DLC was really great. The missions are fun. Some of them are extremely challenging, especially if you're trying to play them solo. And I hope that even if it didn't give us any kind of, as far as I know, any hints about the future, especially Division 3, I hope that it's successful enough that that dream of that game continues on, and we don't have to worry about that not happening. So bravo to the small and very hardworking team over at Ubisoft Massive, who and everyone who supported them in making this DLC. I had a ton of fun with it, and let's get working on Division 3. we have some PlayStation news. They had a PlayStation Days of Play discount announcement come out, and man, there's some executives at Sony who are just grinning from ear to ear. Man, it's they put out this Days of Play announcement. They do this every year. They always discount a bunch of stuff PlayStation wise, and just a couple of weeks after Xbox raised the prices on all of their hardware and a bunch of their accessories and stuff, PlayStation for I think it's 2 weeks is lowering the prices of their consoles, a bunch of their hardware. This includes lowering the price of the PS5 Pro from I think it was 700 or 750 down to 650, which if I remember correctly is now the same price as the raised price, or it might be even less, of that 2 terabyte special edition Series X, even though the Pro does have a decent power boost over the Series X. And then the base consoles are all dropped as well. I believe $50 or $100, making them all relatively or significantly cheaper than their Xbox counterparts. It was interesting. Now, this isn't a permanent price drop. I'm sure they're going to go back up at least to their regular prices. This seems like a pretty obvious move to counter the Switch 2 release, which is coming up here in just a few days. One of the biggest strengths of PlayStation this generation has been its unit sales of hardware, and my guess is they want to do at least a little bit to mitigate any damage the Switch 2 may do to that. So it kind of makes sense for them to drop it. I have to also imagine this means they have at least in the United States, a ton of inventory already here. And so that they're probably going to be selling through a ton of their non-tariffed hardware. And that's, I assume, why they're able to do this. Um, it also raises the question, and it puts a bunch of pie in Xbox's face, but it raises the question of, did maybe Xbox jump the gun a bit on those price jumps? And it's more and more seeming like they probably did. I don't know a ton about the whole tariff situation and how all this stuff works, but we do know that in the weeks since Xbox raised their prices, there's been some tentative kind of temporary deals with, I believe, with China, between China and the United States. I believe another one, a big one, is with Vietnam and the United States, because a lot of Chinese companies make their products in Vietnam and ship them and to try to get around stuff. I'm under the impression that the tariffs are still an issue, but not nearly as big of an issue as it was with, 150 plus percent. It's much, much lower now, even though that could change any day because things are so chaotic here in the States. It's still, with all of that though, there still is a part of me that wonders, how big the smiles are at PlayStation and how many people at Xbox are kind of maybe shooting off some emails being like, hey, is it too late to reverse those decisions? And I have to imagine it's not an easy decision to make. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm really curious what's going to happen at the end of the Days of Play with PlayStation. Are they going to return the prices to what they were before? Are they going to use that as an opportunity to then raise their prices? So you have the old price, then you discount for the Days of Play, and then you raise the prices. Maybe this is people's like last chance to get these things cheap. We'll have to wait and see. And then I'm really curious to see if Xbox will, come with their tail between their legs and be like, just kidding, and either put prices back to what they were, or what I've been saying for a couple of years now, just take a hit on the hardware because it's not moving. When they raised those prices, it was so gut wrenching for me because it's like, you guys have had this opportunity to heavily discount these consoles that aren't really moving that well. I'm sure there's a bunch out there to be sold. Maybe there have been rumors that it's really hard to even find a Series X or S right now, but maybe that's not connected. And I don't know. We'll just have to wait to see. I mean, maybe Xbox is thrown in the towel for this gen and they're happy to just keep pushing their multi-platform, their PC side of things, Game Pass, streaming, all that. And they're not too worried about hardware until the next one drops. And even then, I wouldn't be surprised if it's kind of hey, we have new hardware and it's really, really good and fast. We're subsidizing it a little bit, so it's cheaper than making your own thing. Get it or don't. We don't really care. So I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But if you were looking to get a PS5 or PS5 Pro, this is probably the time to do it because it's extremely affordable at the moment. Elden Ring Night Rain has come out. I genuinely forgot this game even existed, if you want me to be completely honest. It has come out with a open critic score of 80. This is the Elden Ring kind of spin-off game that it's kind of a roguelite. It's kind of an extraction game. It's this more kind of procedural, even though not entirely, kind of multiplayer experience where you pick a specific, like a preset character, and you go in with other people to go into, the Elden Ring world, and the kind of greater From Software world, and try to get through this world and beat this, beat this thing. So, um, it's been really interesting. So they've announced already they've sold 2 million copies in like 24 hours, which is crazy. But also, if you listen to any reviews or look on Steam, like on Steam, it has a mixed review kind of status, which is surprising. Elden Ring's one of the highest rated games ever, and to a lot of people, one of the greatest games ever made. And so I think that kind of accounts for these 2 million sales, because people just probably bought it blindly, just like, oh, more Elden Ring, dope. Or people who are From Software freaks who buy everything they put out. Probably that's, I have to imagine that's a big part of the sales, and good for them. Like, cool. But I'm curious how this plays out in the long run. There's all this talk about, oh, on Steam, there's like 300,000 players, blah, blah, blah. If I was a betting man, I would say that this is a ripe candidate that in like a month, we're going to see the articles coming out and the content creators putting out their videos saying, what happened to Night Rain? As that player base probably drops off pretty quickly. And that's pretty normal for single player games. And this has a component for solo play, but this is primarily meant to be a multiplayer experience. And when you listen to the reviews of this game, even from people who love From Software games, from who like these kind of experiences, it seems like it's at best kind of a mild excitement, and at worst just kind of a yeah, this is interesting, but not really a thing I want to do long run. And I'm curious if that plays out when it comes to actual players, though. We've learned very well that even outlets and journalists and stuff like that, who seem to basically be normal people who just happen to have these, these audiences, they aren't always on the mark. So there's a very good chance that this ends up being super successful and long living. I will say, it getting an 80 Metacritic score, or Open Critic, sorry, that's interesting to me, because you have to, or at least if you're me, you kind of assume that 5 or 10 points of that are just fanboy points, are just people who just love From Software, and it will always get some benefit of the doubt. And so it kind of makes you wonder, like, maybe this isn't quite the masterful experience everyone thinks it is. But they put it out. My guess, and I don't think this is, I think this has maybe even been disputed. My assumption with this game was that this was a multiplayer component that they were developing for Elden Ring itself, maybe for a DLC or maybe for an expansion, and they just decided to spin it off into its own thing, to a standalone thing, and that's what Night Rain is. I would put money on that. At least, if I could, I would. And so maybe the expectations, they've already sold 2 million copies. That 2 million copies, especially if it's reusing assets and it was already in development anyways, is probably already a success. And there's a ton of games out there who would kill to sell 2 million copies. So while this may end up going down this kind of like this like weird thing they did, it'll likely still be very successful. And even if it's not their best effort or the greatest thing they've ever made, I suspect it's not going to hurt their reputation at all. Speaking of hurting reputations, we have EA has shut down the Black Panther game and shuttered the studio making it cliffhanger. This sucks. This is kind of a pattern. You can really look at this stuff in two ways, right? You can look at it as a company like EA. We see this happening with like Ubisoft as well. These companies, these third-party publishers, which are becoming fewer and fewer, especially these big ones, these big AAA ones, are trying to survive, right? I know they make billions of dollars a year. I know their CEOs take too much of their own, take too much of the cut. I understand all the issues that people have with this stuff. But what I implore people to consider is that, the Ubisofts, the EAs, the 2Ks even, we don't want all of these companies to be owned by PlayStation or Tencent or Xbox, or or like we don't want everything consolidated, even though depending on your fan loyalty or whatever, you may be more or less okay with it. It's not a good thing, right? And so as easy as it is and as understandable as it is to hate on EA, to hate on Ubisoft, they still do provide a service, right? Like not everything can be, these smaller publishers and stuff like that. And they have their niche for sure, but it's nice to still have this competition with Xbox and PlayStation, these big platforms, and to have these third party big AAA games like what we get from these studios, at least that we hope we get. So this blows, obviously. It can't be that surprising. I feel like we had not seen anything about this Black Panther game, even though we had heard about it for quite a while. This kind of came at the same time as when Iron Man was announced, and to be fair, we haven't heard anything about that either. But we've seen a ton of movement around it. Back when the bunch of BioWare devs got at one point temporarily, and then eventually permanently, when a bunch of these BioWare devs got moved from BioWare to like EA Motive, that was because of Iron Man. And my impression is, especially if you look at the people who got moved there, they must be like heavy in full production. Very likely, I wouldn't be surprised if they're in the, kind of the last half of that, right? If it's a game that they're probably planning on putting out, my guess would be next year, 2026. And it just seems like it was further along, and maybe there was a choice to be made at EA, like, hey, we can keep working on Black Panther or Iron Man. Iron Man is way further ahead. Black Panther, I don't even know if it was in full production yet, and it's easier to cut a studio and a game like that, even as heartless as that sounds, because it is. It sucks. I'm never going to cheer on this stuff, right? Now, what's interesting is this came along with EA talking about how they're basically going to try to commit on and focus on a much smaller variety of games and franchises. Obviously, talking about like their sports games, their battlefields, as well as some others. And what was interesting about it is they talked about those big franchises they want to focus on. And then it was also a thing of like, oh, and we are still working on the next Iron Man, the third game in the Jedi series at Respawn, and Mass Effect. It is comforting that Mass Effect, as someone who wants to see that next game happen, comes up in these conversations. I would say any game that isn't being brought up in these conversations, that would not feel very good, in my opinion, if I was someone working on one of those. So I'm aware of someone who actually got laid off along with this, who wasn't at Cliffhanger, and I remember seeing in some of the articles that the thought is that there were other people laid off at other studios. The person I saw was kind of like a community manager, who I don't know what studio they were currently working with. One thing I've learned about EA is that they, with the community people, they often don't just have one community person for one studio forever. They kind of move them around as they are about to have a game come out. So, like if a studio is 3 years away from having the game come out, they don't really have community people attached to that studio because there's not really much to say. There may be someone who does some social media posting and stuff, but they kind of focus their people on the game, like on the studios and stuff that are about to have something big. So I can confirm that there are definitely people who were laid off along with Cliffhanger, in this Black Panther cancellation. And like I said before, it sucks. It's barely even surprising anymore. And again, I don't think we should allow that to make us kind of cold to it, or be, oh, whatever, it's just another layoff. Like, no, these all suck and they should be treated individually and noticed. But I also, you can only get so upset every time they happen because they're just gonna keep happening, and that's awful. So good luck to all the people who got laid off. I hope they all can find spots ASAP. I hope EA did what they typically do and did their best to place people internally before they were let go completely. But that isn't always what happens. There was a very interesting chapter added to the former PlayStation executive doing interviews saga, Shuhei Yoshida, who just left PlayStation within the last couple months, and has been doing a big media podcast tour ever since. calls subscription services dangerous and was very much targeting Xbox Game Pass. It's really, really interesting. So Shuhei and Sean Layden, another former PlayStation exec who I think works at Tencent now, ironically, maybe, or hypocritically, maybe more negatively, have both been real vocal about Xbox and Game Pass. And like in this situation, it was Shuhei was suggesting, from what I gathered, that the subscription services kind of make studios subservient to Xbox and dependent on them and things like that. And it's just what's strange about these guys is, they don't work at PlayStation anymore. But man, you would think they do. Like it's very strange. And if there was an Xbox dev doing the same thing, I would call it out as well. Was it Mike Ybarra or something who left there? You would think he works for PlayStation now, the way he talks sometimes. So you don't really see it happen any other way. And there's just existing relationships and stuff like that. I get it. But a lot of the stuff these guys say is like kind of wild because it basically seems like they don't have like a fundamental understanding of Game Pass or like don't understand that Xbox is very clearly trying to do something different than what PlayStation is doing, that they're literally going two different directions as companies. And it seems like either they don't understand it or they're like playing dumb, I guess. And the question for me is just, it comes down to like, is it malicious or are they just so entrenched in these ideas they had as PlayStation executives, kind of in that mindset of doing what PlayStation does, which it does very well, where they just can't even comprehend the idea of someone else's strategy not being make exclusive games for console at full price. Shuhei is the same one who just a couple weeks ago was like shaming people about like, well, if you just treat your money appropriately, $70 to $80 games aren't that expensive. Like some very old school thinking going on, at least in my opinion. And and I think that it kind of sucks. And it's fine. Like these people, they probably do, they definitely have biases, right? And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. My issue is that it propagates these conversations because these people have big audiences and people that respect what they say, or at least like what they say because of who they're saying it against, right? And it really reinforces kind of bad takes, in my opinion. And I think that sucks. I think it makes the whole conversation worse. Gaming discourse is already at an all-time low, in my opinion. And then when you have executives and these like pretty well-known, like well-respected people not making it better and arguably making it worse, I think it sucks. And I think it's really strange, the way that this has been happening. Like surely PlayStation could have just found another place for you to work to say this stuff, but to each their own. We have the Switch 2 coming out here in just a few days. Before I record again, it'll be out on June 5th, which is the day before Summer Game Fest, which is kind of wild. I have a bunch of predictions about this, and I don't think any of them are really hot takes. I think it's going to sell the most units for hardware ever. It's almost a guarantee, and they are going to push that heavily. I don't think it's going to sell nearly as well as the Switch. I don't think it'll even sell half as many, because I truly do believe the Switch 2 is the Switch Pro we should have gotten like 3 years ago, and they didn't do it because the Switch was still selling so well. I don't think this console is going to have the same legs that the Switch has had, and I'm really curious if we're going to see a similar situation as the PS4 and 5, where we're going to see a ton of original Switch users just kind of be like, I don't see any reason to upgrade right now. I'm still playing Mario Kart 8. Like I don't need to play World. That looks neat, but it looks basically the same as what I have. And I already have what I have. And I have like 4 Switches, right? So I think it's not going to sell nearly as well as the first one. And I suspect that it won't natively support third-party games for as long as people think it will. We know it has DLSS, and that is going to give it longer legs. It actually does have a lot of RAM, a lot of good RAM in it, which is good. But its SoC, the GPU and CPU kind of combined chip, it's really old and it's extremely inefficient. we're under the impression it may only have like 2 hours of battery life, which isn't great. And I just don't. I don't think that even with DLSS and a little bit more of this power, I will be very surprised if future AAA third party games end up on this, unless they're streamed the way that they did with the original Switch, which is not the best experience I've heard. So I'm really curious to how this plays out in the long run. They'll be fine. They're going to sell a ton of this thing, but I don't think it's going to be the same like sensation that the first Switch was. And I think that's okay. I don't think they need it to be. I suspect the Switch has ensured Nintendo's health for a very long time. Not to mention how they were already probably pretty well taken care of by the Wii in their previous generations as well. So we'll see what happens. Let me know what you're excited for Switch 2. CD Projekt Red has confirmed that Cyberpunk 2077 sequel has entered pre-production. If you don't know, this game isn't being led by their original studio, but instead a new one that they've started in Boston. I've seen a bunch of people posting about this who work there, who are like, "Oh, I can't wait to show you what we're working on and stuff." It's not going to come anytime soon. I think that's to be sure. If they just started pre-production, that can be a relatively expedited process. It kind of depends what they've been doing before that. I assume doing some concepts and things and prototyping and stuff. It could come together relatively quickly. It is a sequel, so that always makes things easier. But there's a pretty solid chance this is a 2030 game, in that window, in that area. And that's fine. They're working full fledged on Witcher 4 right now. I believe that's due out here in the next year or two. That will then obviously carry them for a couple years, and then we'll start getting the hype about the 2077 sequel. So, um, I'm definitely one who was really negative on Cyberpunk for a long time. I've definitely come around on it in the last year or so, especially when I got to play it on my relatively nice PC. It's a pretty cool game. I still think it's way overhyped and in some pretty extreme ways. I think it's actually still a relatively shallow game, even though it has some pretty cool stuff. And they did some good work on it post launch. I don't really get it. I don't get the hype for a lot of the stuff. It's a very shallow world in my opinion. Just being in it feels very artificial. Like you feel like you're just around a bunch of robots, where I think other games have done a better job of at least somewhat tricking you into thinking that you're in like a living world. But that's not what Cyberpunk is. It's good at other stuff, and it's extremely good at some other things, and that does make me excited for the sequel. So I will say my mind has changed enough on it, even though I'm still kind of negative on Cyberpunk 2077. When I finished it the most recent time, it got me really emotional. I really enjoyed it, and it genuinely like hurt my heart to know that like we didn't get likely all of the DLC and all the features and all of the stuff that they originally intended. I hurt for the game it was meant to be, that you can see clues of, you can see bits and pieces that it was almost this generational game that they kind of hyped it up to be, and instead it came out and it's just a nice game. It's a good RPG. So the wait begins for the sequel. And then finally we have this strange Mind's Eye game, this strange situation where, so the Mind's Eye is this game that just looks like a game engine tech demo to me. And the developer has like thrown out accusations that they're being like attacked by bots in it, and definitely like alluding to it being Rockstar who is attacking it. I think some of the people there are former Rockstar devs, so they seem to think that Grand Theft Auto is coming after their weird tech demo game. And apparently this game, it's from the same studio that has like an engine where you can like make your own games in it. And at one point this was supposed to be one of the games you can make of that engine, but now they've said that Mind's Eye, the game, will have a like creator tool that isn't the existing engine tool. It's super strange. This is a really weird game. I feel like it's only getting attention because of all this drama, because the actual footage we've seen, it looks like it would have been really cool at like the end of the PS3 generation, but like it definitely looks like one of those old demos from back then, just with more modern graphics. So I I don't really know what's going on with that, and I think we're just gonna have to wait to find out. Okay, so we have for content updates. It's just Summer Game Fest is coming up, and the upcoming week, I do plan on co-streaming it, as well as the Xbox Showcase on the following Sunday over on my Twitch channel. So that's just look up Bon Diesel over on Twitch, and you can find me there. Follow if you haven't already, so we can hang out and watch those shows together. And that's kind of all I have for updates right now. It's I'm both busy and there's not a lot going on. And that is where I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you for listening to this episode. Subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, and subscribe to the Bond Diesel YouTube channel to get all of my videos, including this podcast. Thank you to everyone who supports as a YouTube member and or a Twitch subscriber. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and all of my other content, please check out the links in the show description. If you have any questions or feedback, comment on Spotify or YouTube, let me know on my Discord, or hit me up on social media at Bondiesel or at the Baunfire. That is all I have for this episode of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. So until next time.